Dear students, today we are going to discuss about the policies and frameworks facilitating inclusive education. Following the end of National Socialism and World War II, the international community made human rights a central feature of its mutual efforts to bring peace, stability and prosperity to the world. Article 1 of the UN Charter, which is a treaty through which states become members of the United Nations, stipulates that one of the purposes of the United Nations is to promote and encourage respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms for all. Based on this, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights UDHR was adopted in 1948. It is a widely recognized text built into many constitutions and other laws around the world, but in its essence, it is a morally and politically binding resolutions with a very little legal force. Part of the agreement to the UDHR was that negotiations would continue to agree on a binding treaty. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that is UDHR, is a milestone document in the history of human rights, drafted by representatives with a different legal and cultural background from all regions of the world. The declaration was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in Paris on 10th December 1948. General Assembly Resolution 217A as a common standard of achievements for all peoples and all nations. It sets out for the first time fundamental human rights to be universally protected on it has been translated into over 500 languages. The declaration marked the beginning of a new conceptual approach to disability issues as human rights issues. Though it was non-binding, its adoption led to several subsequent UN initiatives that built upon one another. They were the International Year of Disabled Person, that is IYDP 1981, the World Programme of Action concerning disabled persons, an outcome of the IYDP, the Decade of Disabled Persons 1983 to 1992, which was designated as the time frame for the implementation of the World Programme Action, and the standard rules on the equalization of opportunities for persons with disabilities 1993. Those initiatives comprised policies to address the situations of persons with disabilities specifically. Let us discuss the UN Declaration on Education for All, that is EFA 1990. In 1990, the International Literacy Year, about 1,500 delegates from 155 countries and representatives of some 150 governmental, non-governmental and intergovernmental organizations met at the World Conference on Education for All in Jomtien, Thailand, and called upon all countries to universalize adequate basic educations. The conference participants adopted the World Declaration on Education for All and a framework for action focusing on meeting basic learning needs. The declaration begins by stating that every person, child, youth and adult shall be able to benefit from educational opportunities designed to meet their basic learning needs. In that sense, education for all is an expanded vision encompassing programs, activities and services in the public and private sectors aimed at meeting the basic needs of Convention Against Discrimination in Education. Convention Against Discrimination in Education is a multilateral treaty adopted by UNESCO on 14 December 1960 in Paris and came into effect on 22nd May 1962, which aims to combat discrimination and racial segregation in the field of education. The Convention Against Discrimination in Education stipulates that all persons, regardless of race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, economic conditions or birth, have the right to receive an equal standard of and access to education at any level. According to the convention, contracting parties are required to abolish any discriminatory policies in the field of education. Furthermore, contracting parties must implement national policies that will establish primary education as free and compulsory, provide equal education opportunities for citizens, and ensure that there is no discrimination in the admission of peoples to educational institutions. Additionally, the convention delineates that state parties must submit periodic reports about their national policies. It also states that reservation to the convention are not permitted. Let us discuss about the UN Convention on Rights of a Child 1989. The first UN document specially focused on child rights was a declaration on the rights of the child, but instead of being a legally binding document, it was more like a moral guide of conduct for government. It was not until 1989 that the global community adopted the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, making it the first international legally binding document concerning child rights. The convention consists of 54 articles covering all four major categories of child rights: right to life, right to development, right to protection, and right to participation. It came into force on the 2nd September 1990. Today, the convention has been ratified by 192 countries, becoming the most ratified of all international human rights treaties. India signed and ratified the convention in 1992. Let us discuss the UNESCO Salamanca Statement and Framework for Action 1994. The Salamanca Declaration 1994, a landmark international statement, proclaims the fundamental right of education to every child. The child with special needs must have access to regular schools with a child-centered pedagogy. Salamanca Declaration in 1994 that was endorsed by the UNESCO and 92 countries including India recommended major policy shifts to promote inclusive education. Inclusive education is education that includes everybody, celebrates differences, supports learning and responds to individual needs. This is where children with disabilities or more appropriately different abilities learn along with other children in regular schools. It stresses that regular schools with inclusive orientation is the most effective means of combating discriminatory attitudes. Next, see the education for all. The statement begins with a commitment to education for all, recognizing the necessities and urgency of providing education for all children, young people and adults within the regular education system. It says those children with special educational needs must have access to regular schools and acts. Regular schools with this inclusive orientation are the most effective means of combating discriminatory attitudes, creating welcoming communities, binding an inclusive society, and achieving education for all. Moreover, they provide an effective education to the majority of children and improve the efficiency and ultimately the cost effectiveness of the entire education system. Let us see the inclusive schooling. The statement also calls on the international community to endorse the approach of inclusive schooling and to support the development of special needs education as an integral part of all education programs. In particular, it calls on UNESCO, UNICEF, UNDP and the World Bank for this endorsement. It asks for the United Nations and its specialized agencies to strengthen their inputs for technical cooperation and improve their networking for more efficient support to integrated special needs provisions. Non-governmental organizations are asked to strengthen their collaboration with official national bodies and become more involved in all aspects of inclusive education. Dear students, now we are going to discuss about the equalizations of opportunity. The framework for action says inclusion and participation are essential to human dignity and to the enjoyment and exercise of human rights. In the field of education, this is reflected in bringing about a genuine equalization of opportunity. The fundamental principles of the inclusive school is that all children should learn together where possible and that ordinary schools must recognize and respond to the diverse needs of their students while also having a continuum of support and services to match these needs. Inclusive schools are the most effective at binding solidarity between children with special needs and their peers. Let us discuss about the United Nations Economic Social Commissions for Asia and Pacific. Governments in the Asia and Pacific region have declared the extension of the Asian and Pacific Decade of Disabled Persons 1993 to 2002 for another decade 2003 to 2012 as policy guidelines for the renewed decade. The high-level intergovernmental meeting to conclude the Asian and Pacific Decade held at Utsushiga, Japan, October 2002, adopted the BIVOCA Millennium Framework for Action Towards an Inclusive, Barrier-Free and Rights-Based Society for Persons with Disability in Asia and the Pacific. BMF incorporates disability concerns into national policies and programs to achieve the targets of the United Nations Millennium Development Goals, that is MDG. The BMF identify the following 7 points area. Let us see one by one. Self-help organization of persons with disabilities and related family and parental association. Women with disabilities. The next one is early detection, early intervention and education. Training and employment including self-employment. Then access to built environment and public transport. Access to information and communications including information and communication and assistive technologies and poverty alleviation through capacity building, social security and sustainable livelihood programs. The thrust of the new decades is to fully implement the paradigm shift from a charity-based approach to a right-based or human rights approach to the full range of disability concern in the region. The goal of the BIVOCA Millennium Framework for Action is to promote an inclusive, barrier-free and right-based society for persons with disabilities in Asia and the Pacific. The BMF as a strategy to achieve its goal specifically urges governments to consider supporting and contributing to the work of the Ad hoc Committee on a Comprehensive and Integral International Convention on Promotion and Protection of the Rights and Dignity of Persons with Disabilities. Out of the estimated 600 million people with disabilities in the world, 400 million live in the Asian and Pacific region and over 40% of them live in poverty. More often than not, they are among the poorest of the poor. Living conditions of persons with disabilities continue to be largely disparate, deprived of human rights enjoyed by other persons and discriminated against because of their disability. Although disability-specific international documents exist, their non-binding status lacks strength of the enforceability and certain areas have not been covered sufficiently. While legally binding human rights treaties have relevance to disability concern, they are not disability specific and have not been given enough attention. In the view of the above, UNESCAP supports governments in the region to consider the establishment of the disability specific and legally binding convention UNESCAP as the only region-wide intergovernmental body is in a position to take an active role to promote constructive discussion and movement toward enacting the convention. The new Asian Pacific Decade of Disabled Person 2003 to 2012 has set targets including at least 75% of children and youth with disability completing primary schooling by 2010. All infant and young children with disability will have received early intervention services with the support for their families by 2012. 5-year enrollment targets to be set and monitored. The Commission at its 58th session adopted resolutions 58/4 of 22 May 2002 on promoting an inclusive, barrier-free and right-based society for people with disabilities in the Asian and Pacific region in the 21st century, by which it proclaimed the extension of the Asian and Pacific Decade of Disabled Persons 1993 to 2002 for another decade 2003 to 2012. Barrier-free environment enables people with disabilities to move about safely and freely and use the facilities within the built environment. The goal of the barrier-free design is to provide an environment that supports the independent functioning of individuals so that they can participate without assistance in everyday activities. Therefore, to the maximum extent possible, bindings or places or transportation systems for public use will be made barrier-free. Objectives of the convention. First one is recognize that persons with disabilities are entitled to the full range of rights which are principally guaranteed in the United Nations Charter on Human Rights and declinated in the 6 core human rights treaties. The second one is manifest the paradigm shift from a charity model approach to disability to a human rights approach to disability concern. The third one is ensure right-based development for persons with a disability. Let us discuss about the principles to be embodied in the conventions. Reform that persons with disabilities enjoy the same range of human rights as a persons without disabilities. Ensure non-discrimination and equal opportunities. Acknowledge that lack of provisions of accommodations and or positive action to eliminate barriers in the form of discrimination. Acknowledging that fulfilling basic needs of persons with disabilities, that is nutrition, clean water, sanitation, poverty, alleviation, social security, education and employment is realization of essential social economical rights. Ensure rights-based development. Ensure that principles of non-discrimination and equal opportunity apply to persons with disabilities without any distinction of kind and degree of disability, gender, socio-economic and national status of a person. Ensure participation of all stakeholders in monitoring and review processes. First and foremost, persons with disabilities, their organizations and human rights organizations. Scope of the convention. Convention should cover civil, cultural, economic, political and social rights of persons with disabilities. Definition. Definition of disability may be based on the International Classification of Functioning, Disability and Health, that is ICF. Disability is not just a medical diagnosis of a person. Environmental and social factors greatly influence disability experienced by a person. Then the disability includes physical, sensory, intellectual and psychiatric disability. Disability can be multiple, permanent, temporary and perceived. Next we are going to discuss about the mode of negotiations of the convention, formation of a working group and or consultative group. Civil society active involvement is indispensable in the process. In our region, a task force on the convention has already been formed within the Thematic Working Group on Disability Related Concerns, which is a regional mechanism to fulfill the targets of the BIOCA Millennium Framework, and participated in by governments, the United Nations bodies and agencies and NGO. Convention on the Rights of Persons with a Disability, that is UNCRPD. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities spells out clearly and unconditionally that persons with disabilities have equal access and a right to full and effective enjoyment of all human rights. The removal of barriers explicitly termed as a condition for access and the enjoyment of equality until December 13, 2006, when the convention was adopted by the UN General Assembly. Persons with a disability had been ducked away in saving classes and sidelined in a few resolutions and declarations. This contributed significantly to the invisibility of a persons with disabilities in human rights discourse, which was highlighted also by the Millennium Development Goals MDGs, that is, failure to mention persons with disabilities explicitly. UNCRPD is an international instrument that provides persons with disabilities the same human rights that everyone else enjoys. It marks a radical shift in defining and understanding disability. That is, it moves from a medical or social perspective to a human rights based approach. The summary of the UNCRPD, such as Article 1, explain about the purpose. The purpose of the convention is to promote, protect and ensure the full enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by all persons with disabilities. People with disabilities include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual or sensory impairments which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. Article 2, Definitions. This article defines some of the key terms used in the convention, including communication, language, discrimination on the basis of disability, reasonable accommodations and universal design. Article 3, General Principles. The convention is based on the principles of respect for dignity, non-discrimination, participation and inclusion, respect for difference, equality of opportunity, accessibility, equality between men and women and respect for children. Article 4, Gender Obligations. Countries must take a range of measures with the active involvement of people with disabilities to ensure and promote the full realization of all human rights and fundamental freedoms for all persons with disabilities without discrimination of any kind. Article 5, Equality and Non-Discrimination. Everyone is equal before and under the law. Everyone is entitled to the equal protection and benefit of the law without discrimination. Article 6, Women with Disabilities. Women and girls with disabilities experience multiple discriminations. Countries must take all appropriate measures to ensure that women with disabilities are able to fully enjoy the rights and freedoms set out in the conventions. Article 7, Children with Disabilities. Children with disabilities have the same human rights as all other children. The best interest of the child must be a primary consideration in all actions concerning children with disabilities. Children with disabilities have the right to express their views and all matters affecting them. Article 8, Awareness Raising. Countries must raise awareness of the rights, capabilities and contributions of people with disabilities. Countries must challenge stereotypes and prejudices relating to people with disabilities through campaigning, education, media and awareness raising programs. Article 9, Accessibility. People with disabilities have the right to access all aspects of society on an equal basis with others, including the physical environment, transportations, informations and communications and other facilities and services provided to the public. Article 10. Right to life. People with disabilities have the right to life. Countries must take all necessary measures to ensure that people with disabilities are able to effectively enjoy this right on an equal basis with others. Article 11. Situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies. Countries must take all necessary measures to ensure the protection and safety of all persons with disabilities in situation of risk, including armed conflict, humanitarian emergencies and natural disasters. Article 12. Equal recognitions before the law. People with disabilities have the right to recognition as persons before the law. People with disabilities have legal capacity on an equal basis with others in all aspects of life. Countries must take appropriate measures to provide support to people with disabilities so that they can effectively exercise their legal capacity. Article 13. Access to justice. People with disabilities have the right to effective access to justice on an equal basis with others, including through the provision of appropriate accommodations. Article 14. Liberty and security of persons. People with disabilities have the right to liberty and security of persons on an equal basis with others. Existence of disability alone cannot be used to justify deprivation of liberty. Article 15. Freedom from torture or cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. People with disability have the right to be free from torture and from cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. No one shall be subjected to medical or scientific experimentations without his or her free consent. Article 16. Freedom from exploitations, violence and abuse. People with disabilities have the right to be protected from all forms of exploitations, violence and abuse, including the gender-based aspect within and outside the home. Article 17. Protecting the integrity of the person. Every person with disabilities has a right to respect for his or her physical and mental integrity on an equal basis with others. Article 18. Liberty of movement and nationality. People with disabilities have the right to a nationality. Children with disabilities have the right to a name and to know and be cared for by their parents. Article 19. Living independently and being included in the community. People with disabilities have the right to live independently in the community. Countries must ensure that people with disabilities have the opportunity to choose where they live and with whom they live, and that they are provided with the support necessary to do this. Article 20. Personal mobility. Countries must take effective and appropriate measures to ensure personal mobility for people with disabilities in the manner and time of their choice and at affordable cost. People with disabilities also have the right to access quality mobility aids, assistive technologies and forms of live assistance and intermediaries. Article 21. Freedom of expression and opinion and access to information. People with disabilities have the right to express themselves, including the freedom to give and receive information and ideas through all forms of communications, including through accessible formats and technologies, sign language, braille, augmentative and alternative communications, mass media and all other accessible means of communication. Article 22. Respect for privacy. People with disabilities have the right to privacy. Information about people with disabilities, including personal informations and information about their health, should be protected. Article 23. Respect for human and the family. People with disabilities have the right to marry and to found a family. Countries must provide effective and appropriate support to people with disabilities in bringing up children and provide alternative care to children with disabilities where the immediate family is unable to care for them. Article 24, Education. People with disabilities have a right to education without discrimination. Countries must ensure that people with disabilities can access an inclusive, quality and free primary and secondary education in their own community. Countries must also provide reasonable accommodations and individualized support to maximize academic and social development. Article 25, Health. People with disabilities have the right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health without discrimination. Countries must take all appropriate measures, including measures that are gender sensitive, to ensure that people with disabilities have access to the same range, quality and standard of health care that is available to everyone else and which are close to people's own communities. Article 26, Habitations and Rehabilitations. Countries must take effective and appropriate measures enable people with disabilities to develop, attain and maintain maximum ability, independence and participation through the provision of habitations and rehabilitation services and programs. Article 27, Work and Employment. People with disabilities have the right to work, including the right to work in an environment that is open, inclusive and accessible. Countries must take appropriate steps to promote employment opportunities and career advancement for people with disabilities. Article 28, Adequate Standard for Living and Social Protection. People with disabilities have the right to an adequate standard of living, including food, water, clothing and housing, and to effective social protection, including poverty reduction and public housing programs. Article 29, Participation in political and public life. People with disabilities have the right to participate in politics and in public affairs as well as to vote and to be elected. Article 30, Participation in cultural life, recreation, leisure and sports. People with disability have the right to take part in cultural life on an equal basis with others, including access to cultural materials, performances and services, and to recreational, leisure and sporting activities. Article 31, Statistics and Data Collections. Countries must collect information about people with disabilities with the active involvement of people with disabilities so that they can better understand the barriers they experience and make the convention's rights real. Article 32 to 50. Articles 32 to 50 explains how countries which are bound by the conventions must give it full effect. They also explain the responsibility of countries to report to the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities on how they are putting the convention into effect. To conclude, dear students, I hope you all understood the policies and frameworks facilitating inclusive education. Thank you.